Helena walked slowly through the mansion's gardens, the sea breeze gently touching her wrinkled face. The salty smell of the ocean mingled with the scent of the lavender that adorned the stone path. She stopped beside an old fountain, watching the water dance softly. Her thoughts wandered to the past, to the days when the house was full of laughter and life. Now, everything seemed desolate, every corner of the mansion reflecting her own loneliness. The loss of her husband 15 years ago had left her empty, and her children, Clara and Marcelo, were increasingly distant, only concerned with their own interests and, perhaps, her fortune. Feeling the weight of loneliness, Helena decided it was time to take action. She needed someone by her side, someone to bring a little light into her dark days. It was then that she decided to hire a personal trainer, someone young and energetic who could help her stay active and, perhaps, provide her with a bit of companionship. The day Raphael arrived was sunny. Helena waited on the porch, her gaze fixed on the entrance to the property. When Raphael finally arrived, she observed him carefully. He was young, with a warm smile and a confident posture that radiated a sense of freshness. Dressed casually, he had the carefree air of someone still discovering life. "Mrs. Helena, it's a pleasure to meet you," Raphael said, extending his hand. "The pleasure is mine, Raphael. I hope we get along well," Helena replied with a reserved smile, while part of her remained cautious. He seemed to be everything she needed at that moment, but a persistent doubt began to grow in her heart. Would he be different from the others? The next morning, Raphael began leading Helena through a light stretching session in the garden. They talked about trivial things, laughing at small jokes. However, Helena noticed that while Raphael was helping her with the exercises, he subtly asked questions about her family and financial situation. He seemed interested, but there was something in his tone that made her suspicious. "And your children, Mrs. Helena? Don't they visit you often?" he asked, seemingly casually. Helena gave a vague response, keeping her suspicions to herself. She knew she needed time to better understand Raphael's intentions. Maybe he was just being polite, or perhaps there was something more. Later that day, Helena received a call from her daughter, Clara. The conversation was short and tense. Clara needed money to solve an urgent problem at work. Shortly after, Marcelo also called, asking for financial help for his new art exhibition abroad. Helena sighed as she hung up the phone. Her children were more distant than ever, always present only when there was something to gain. It was at that moment that Helena began to formulate a plan. She needed to know who truly cared about her, not for her fortune, but for who she was. She decided to test them all: Clara, Marcelo, and Raphael. Helena organized a dinner at the mansion and invited Clara, Marcelo, and Raphael. The atmosphere was thick with tension. During the dinner, Helena pretended to be discouraged and, with a heavy sigh, revealed that she had lost most of her fortune in a risky investment. "I think I'll have to sell the mansion and move to a simpler house," she announced, carefully observing the reactions around the table. Clara reacted coldly, expressing that she couldn't help financially. Marcelo seemed more concerned, but it was clear his worry was more about the end of his financial support. Raphael, however, remained unfazed, smiling at Helena. "Money isn't everything in life, Mrs. Helena. I'll be here to help you with or without money," he said, but Helena noticed a glint of interest in his eyes. She knew she had to keep a closer watch and that her game was just beginning. After the dinner, Helena retreated to her living room, sitting in her favorite armchair near the fireplace, which remained unlit on that summer night. She watched through the window as her children, Clara and Marcelo, left, speaking in low voices. They thought she couldn't hear them, but the echoes of their words of worry and irritation reached her. Helena smiled slightly, recognizing the tone of concern in her children, not for her, but for what they might lose. Shortly after, Raphael entered the room. He was quieter than usual, with a look of concern gently drawn on his face. He pulled up a chair and sat beside Helena, his presence radiating warmth. "Mrs. Helena, I know all of this must be very difficult for you," he said, with a touch of empathy in his voice. "If you need help with finances or anything else, I'm here." Helena observed him closely. Despite the sympathetic tone, there was something calculated in his offer. A new line of suspicion emerged in her mind. She decided that the test needed to continue. "I appreciate it, Raphael," she replied softly, "but I need to think through all of this on my own, at least for now." In the days that followed, Helena noticed a subtle change in Raphael's behavior. He remained attentive and kind, but his questions began to shift focus. Instead of talking about exercises or the weather, he started asking about her life before marriage, her memories of youth, and especially what she planned to do with the house and her assets. "You know, Mrs. Helena," he began one day, while helping her take a light walk through the garden, "I've been thinking maybe it's not necessary to sell the mansion. You could, for example, name someone trustworthy as a co-owner. That could avoid a lot of bureaucracy and even some high taxes." Helena stopped and looked at him, her heart beating a little faster. Raphael was being bolder now, slowly revealing his intentions. She needed to keep her composure, so she simply smiled. "That's an interesting idea, Raphael. I'll think about it." A few days later, Clara and Marcelo returned to the mansion. There was a palpable tension between them, and Helena could feel the weight of their concerns in the air. Clara, always direct and practical, was the first to speak. "Mom, we need to talk about that investment, and about your current financial situation," Clara said, sitting on the edge of Helena's armchair. "It's not safe for you to make decisions on your own at this point. Marcelo and I think it might be best if you sign some documents that would give us control to manage what's left. Just to protect your interests, of course." Marcelo, less assertive than his sister, nodded silently, avoiding his mother's gaze. Helena listened attentively, her face expressionless. She knew this moment would come, the moment when her children would try to take control of her life and her assets. She needed to continue with her plan. "I understand your concern, Clara, Marcelo," Helena responded calmly. "But I don't think I'm ready to give up my independence just yet. We need more time to think about this." Later that night, Helena called Maria, her longtime housekeeper, for a private conversation. Maria had always been a source of support and a true pillar in her life, someone she could trust. Helena confided in Maria about her suspicions and Raphael's behavior, as well as her children's attempt to take control of her finances. "I'm afraid they're all after my money, Maria," Helena confessed. "Raphael approached me with a suspicious proposal, and Clara and Marcelo seem more worried about what they'll lose than about me." Maria frowned, concerned. "Mrs. Helena, you know I'll always stand by your side, but you need to be careful. Maybe it's time to put your final plan into action." Helena nodded, her determination reinforced by her loyal friend's words. With Maria's encouragement, Helena decided it was time for a final test, something that would force a genuine reaction from each of them. She planned a meeting for the end of the week and made sure everyone would be present. Raphael, Clara, Marcelo, and Maria. That morning, Helena dressed more carefully than usual, wearing an elegant blue linen dress and tying her gray hair into a sophisticated bun. When everyone arrived, Helena led them into the living room, where the morning sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a golden light. "I've gathered you all here because I have an important decision to share with you," Helena began, her voice firm but calm. "I've decided that, in the years I have left, I want to do good. So, I've resolved to donate what remains of my fortune to charity." The silence that followed was palpable. Helena carefully observed each face. Raphael looked surprised, Clara and Marcelo exchanged tense glances, and Maria stood firm beside Helena, a look of quiet support on her face. "Of course, Mom, that's a big decision," Clara said, her voice slightly tense. "But are you sure? What if you need that money in the future?" Marcelo seemed about to agree, but Helena raised her hand to silence them. "I know what I'm doing," she said with a faint smile. "And now I want to see how each of you truly reacts to this decision." Helena stood firm as she watched the reactions to her declaration about donating her fortune to charity. The shock on Clara's face was the most evident. Her eyes widened, and she instantly began trying to persuade her mother to reconsider. "Mom, I don't think this is sensible. You've always been so careful with money. Why do you suddenly want to give it all away? Clara argued, her voice laden with superficial concern. What if you need expensive medical care in the future? What if— Marcelo, calmer but clearly shaken, interrupted his sister. Mom, we all know you want to do good. But don't you think there might be another way to use this money? Maybe invest in something that benefits the family and still does good. Helena smiled slightly. Her children's reactions were exactly what she expected. Both were trying to rationalize the situation in a way that preserved the possibility of inheriting her fortune. Their expressions revealed more than words could: fear, frustration, and a hint of desperation. Then she turned to Raphael, waiting for his reaction. He was silent, but his eyes were fixed on Helena, assessing her. Finally, he broke the silence. Mrs. Helena, I think you're right to do what you believe is best with your money. I just hope you're also thinking about yourself and what you might need in the future. Despite the kind words, Helena noticed a flicker of concern in Raphael's eyes. He was beginning to realize that his intentions might be thwarted if she truly followed through with her decision. Later that day, after everyone had left, Raphael asked to speak with Helena privately. He suggested a walk through the gardens for their conversation. Walking beside Helena, he finally spoke with a tone that mixed sincerity and urgency. Mrs. Helena, I truly care about you. More than that, I'm worried. The decision you made today made me think a lot. He stopped, looking directly at her. Maybe you need someone to help you navigate through all of this. Someone who will always be by your side, no matter what happens. Helena kept a gentle smile, though her heart began to beat faster. Raphael was being more bold now, trying to win her trust in a more emotional way. She knew he was trying to secure his place in her life, especially now that the promise of wealth was threatened. And what do you suggest, Raphael? Helena asked, curious to see how far he would go. He stepped closer, his voice soft, almost a whisper. Well, maybe we could spend more time together, away from here, a little distance from everything to think more clearly. We could go out for dinner tonight, just the two of us. What do you think? Helena saw this as an attempt at emotional manipulation. Raphael wanted to wrap her in a false sense of security, hoping she would reconsider her decision. She knew she had to keep playing the game. That sounds like a good idea, Raphael. I accept your invitation to dinner, she replied, pretending to consider his words thoughtfully. While Raphael walked away, satisfied, Clara and Marcelo, in another part of the house, were having a heated conversation. For the first time in years, the two siblings seemed united by a common purpose: preserving their mother's fortune. We have to do something, Clara. Mom is clearly confused. She can't just give away all the money like that, Marcelo said, his voice filled with frustration. Clara nodded, agreeing with her brother. We need to convince her to let us manage the money. Maybe we should consider more drastic measures, like putting her under guardianship, Clara suggested with a troubling seriousness. Marcelo hesitated, but saw that Clara was speaking earnestly. The idea of placing their mother under guardianship was extreme, but in his mind, it might be a way to save the family fortune. We need proof that she's not in her right mind. Something we can use legally to justify it, he said as his mind worked quickly. Clara nodded again. She already had legal contacts who could help, but she knew that this decision could be disastrous for their relationship with their mother. However, the fear of losing everything was stronger. That night, Helena prepared herself for dinner with Raphael. She knew this meeting would be crucial to understand just how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. They went to a seaside restaurant, where the waves gently broke in the background, creating an atmosphere of apparent tranquility. During dinner, Raphael was even more direct. He openly and intensely complimented Helena, speaking about her strength and elegance. As the wine flowed, he became bolder, suggesting that they could have a more intimate relationship, perhaps even consider marriage. I've always been attracted to older women, especially those as strong and elegant as you, Helena, he confessed, looking into her eyes with a mixture of charm and seriousness. And I would marry you if that's something you would consider. Helena smiled, hiding her surprise. He had finally revealed his cards, willing to go to the extreme to secure his position. She knew she had to continue with her plan, keeping up the pretense of consideration. It's something to think about, Raphael. You're a charming young man, and indeed, there's much to consider, she said, implying that she was pondering his proposal. Back at the mansion, Helena felt the weight of the evening's revelations. She called Maria for another conversation. The housekeeper immediately noticed the concern on Helena's face and knew that something important had happened. Raphael finally revealed his intentions. He's trying to seduce me, even suggesting marriage, Helena said, shaking her head in disgust. Maria didn't seem surprised. It was to be expected, Mrs. Helena. He realized he was losing control and played his last card. And what about Clara and Marcelo? Are they still fighting over the money?
Helena sighed.
They're considering even putting me under guardianship. I think this confirms what I suspected all along. None of them truly care about me, only about what they can gain. Maria placed a hand on Helena's shoulder. Then it's time to end this game, Mrs. Helena. Unmask them once and for all. Helena nodded, her expression hardening with determination. She knew the final confrontation was near, and she needed to be relentless to reveal the truth and protect her legacy. I'll organize a meeting tomorrow. Everyone will be present, and then I'll make my final move, Helena decided, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of sadness and resolve. The next day dawned with an overcast sky, as if even the weather reflected the tension hanging over Helena's mansion. The living room, where Helena had summoned everyone for a meeting, was filled with an unsettling silence. Clara and Marcelo sat side by side, their faces filled with nervousness and anticipation. Raphael stood near the window, looking out at the sea with a thoughtful gaze, while Maria, standing firm, positioned herself discreetly behind Helena, like a protective shadow. Helena, seated in her favorite armchair, observed the faces in front of her. She knew that what she was about to do would change their lives forever, but she also knew it was necessary. She cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming today. I've called you here because it's time to lay all the cards on the table and clear a few things up, Helena began, her voice firm and controlled. Over the past few weeks, I've conducted a few tests. Tests to understand who really cares about me and who is only interested in my money. They all looked at each other, surprised and apprehensive. Raphael shifted uncomfortably, clearly uneasy, while Clara and Marcelo frowned, trying to decipher what was coming next. I realized that when I mentioned donating my fortune to charity, your reactions were quite revealing, Helena continued with a sad smile. It was painful to realize that those who should care the most about me are, in fact, more concerned about what they stand to lose. The air in the room grew heavier, with each of Helena's words seeming to weigh a ton. She then pulled a small recorder from a nearby drawer, placing it on the table in front of everyone. Clara and Marcelo exchanged confused glances, but Raphael immediately turned pale. Over the past few weeks, I've taken some precautions and recorded some of our conversations, Helena said, pressing the play button. The room was filled with Raphael's voice, smoothly manipulative, suggesting that she make him co-owner of the mansion and insinuating an intimate relationship to secure his place. Helena, why would you do that? Raphael exclaimed, his voice mixing shock and indignation. I can't believe you went this far. I went further, Raphael, Helena replied coldly. I wanted to see how far you would go for this fortune. And now I know. She pressed the button again, and this time the recording revealed a conversation between Clara and Marcelo, discussing the possibility of putting Helena under guardianship to control her money. Their voices were filled with desperation and determination, with no real concern for their mother's well-being. Clara turned pale, and Marcelo lowered his head, both unable to look Helena in the eye. How could you even think of this? Helena asked, her voice full of pain. I'm your mother. I'm not an object you can control. With a deep sigh, Helena rose from her armchair, feeling the weight of the years and heartache on her shoulders. She looked at each of them, her green eyes shining with a mixture of sadness and determination. For years, I tried to be a present mother, but I see now that I failed somewhere, as I raise children who only see money. Raphael, I thought maybe you could be an exception, but your greed proved otherwise. You've all failed to show genuine love and respect, Helena declared, her voice firm, though her hands trembled slightly. She walked over to a small table at the side of the room and picked up a thick envelope. Returning to the center of the room, she held it up for everyone to see. This is my new will. In it, I've decided to donate a significant portion of my fortune to social causes, she said, looking directly at Clara and Marcelo. The rest will be divided among the few people who have shown genuine love and respect for me. People like Maria, who has always stood by my side without ever expecting anything in return. Clara and Marcelo began to protest simultaneously, their voices rising in a confused clamor of excuses and empty promises. Raphael, realizing he was defeated, remained silent, shame written across his face. Nothing you say now will change my decision, Helena said, her voice cutting through like a blade. You showed me who you really are when you thought you could manipulate or control me. This will reflect what I believe to be fair. Clara, unable to contain her emotions, began to cry quietly. Marcelo, seeing the seriousness on Helena's face, felt a wave of remorse wash over him. For the first time in many years, he realized how far he had distanced himself from his mother, how his greed and selfishness had blinded him to what truly mattered. Mom, I'm so sorry, Marcelo began, his voice choked with emotion. I was wrong. I was so worried about losing the money that I forgot what really matters. Clara, wiping away her tears, also approached, her tone soft and remorseful. Mom, I'm sorry too. Truly. I don't want to lose you. I don't want our relationship to end like this. Helena looked at her children, her heart torn between pain and hope. She wanted to believe that her children could change, that they could rediscover what it meant to be a family. Forgiveness is one thing, but forgetting is another, she said finally, her voice softer. I'm willing to try and rebuild our relationship, but you need to understand that my financial decision is final. You will have to prove that your love for me is genuine, and not just an attempt to recover an inheritance. After the tense and revealing meeting, Helena's children left, carrying with them the weight of the consequences of their actions. Raphael, without saying a word, also left the mansion, his posture defeated, his gaze fixed on the ground. As she watched him go, Helena felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Raphael had been a disappointment, but she knew she had to move forward. Maria, who had been silent the entire time, approached Helena and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing, Mrs. Helena. You were brave. I know it was painful, but now you can find the peace you've always deserved, Maria said with a warm smile. Helena smiled back, a weight lifting from her shoulders. She knew that the road to forgiveness and healing would be long, but she felt lighter knowing that she had made the right decision. She looked around the room, now so different from before, and for the first time in many years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Yes, Maria, I think I can finally find peace, and I want you to be by my side in this new beginning. Together, we can do something good with what's left. Maria nodded, her heart warmed by Helena's words. She knew that despite everything, a new chapter was beginning, one where love and respect would prevail over greed and self-interest. A few weeks had passed since the confrontation at the mansion, and Helena now lived in a new, smaller, cozier house by the sea. What once felt like a loss had become a new opportunity for a fresh start. The sound of the ocean, which once echoed lonely through the halls of the old mansion, now brought her a kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. Helena spent her days immersed in simple activities that brought genuine joy. She often walked along the beach, feeling the cool sand under her feet and the salty wind in her hair. Her mornings were filled with reading on the sunny porch, and the afternoons with visits from neighbors, many of whom she had begun to consider friends. It was a small, vibrant community where she could share stories and experiences, feeling part of something greater than her own solitude. You know, Mrs. Helena, I never imagined someone like you would move here, commented one of her new neighbors, Mrs. Beatrice, during a morning walk. But I must say, you've brought so much life to this place. Helena smiled, touched by the words. "I suppose I never imagined this for myself either, Beatrice. But life has a funny way of taking us where we truly need to be." After the confrontation with Helena, Clara and Marcelo began to seriously reflect on their actions and the impact of their choices on their relationship with their mother. Driven by a sense of remorse and the desire to genuinely reconnect with Helena, they started visiting her more often. At first, their visits were timid and hesitant, but over time, they became more natural. One evening, as the sun set over the ocean, Helena received an unexpected visit from Clara and Marcelo. She invited them in, offering tea and freshly baked cookies. The atmosphere was calm but laden with significant silence, as if each one was waiting for the other to start speaking. "Mom, Marcelo began, his voice choked. "I wanted to thank you for giving us a chance to redeem ourselves. I know we don't deserve it after everything we did." Clara agreed, placing a hand on her brother's arm. "And we want to prove that we can be better, Mom. Not because of the money, but because we realize how wrong we were. We're truly trying to change." Helena looked at her children, her heart warmed by the sincere desire for reconciliation she sensed in their words. She knew that the path to healing would be long, but she also knew that she didn't want to spend her remaining years without them. "I'm happy to hear that from you," Helena responded softly. "Let's take it one step at a time together. The past is what it is, but the future is still ours to build." Helena's new life also brought an increasing involvement with the local community. She soon discovered a renewed pleasure in helping others and became involved in various charitable activities. She organized events to raise funds for the local school, coordinated donations to the town's animal shelter, and even started giving reading lessons to children on Wednesday afternoons. During one of these lessons, while reading a children's classic to a group of bright-eyed kids, Helena felt a deep and genuine joy. Every smile, every child's laugh echoed like a melody in her heart, filling the emptiness she had felt for so long. "You have a natural talent with children, Mrs. Helena," commented the schoolteacher, a young woman named Laura. "It's wonderful to see you so involved." "They give me as much as I give them, if not more," Helena replied with a smile. "I think for a long time, I forgot how good it feels to share, without expecting anything in return." The community began to admire Helena not for her wealth, which was now just a detail, but for her wisdom, generosity, and the warmth she brought to everyone around her. She felt that she was finally making a difference, and that was more valuable than any amount of money. One morning, while arranging flowers in a vase, Maria arrived at Helena's new house with an expression that mixed surprise and concern. In her hands, she held a letter. "Mrs. Helena, this letter came for you. It's from Raphael," Maria said, handing the envelope to Helena. Helena looked at the letter, narrowing her eyes slightly. She hadn't expected to hear from Raphael again after how things had ended. She sat on the porch and carefully opened the envelope. The letter was brief but filled with a sincerity she hadn't expected. "Dear Helena, I hope this letter finds you well. I want to start by apologizing for everything I did. I know my actions were driven by greed, and there's no excuse for that. Since I left, I've had a lot of time to reflect on who I am and who I want to be. I'm leaving the city, in search of a new life and a fresh start, where I can become a better person. You made me see my mistakes, and for that I am eternally grateful. I hope that one day you can forgive me. With regret and sincerity, Raphael." Helena felt a mixture of emotions as she read the letter. There was relief that Raphael had acknowledged his mistakes, but also sadness for everything that had happened. She took a deep breath and handed the letter to Maria. "I think we're all searching for a new beginning in one way or another," she said, reflecting on her own words. That evening, as the sun slowly set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Helena sat in her rocking chair on the porch, watching the calm sea. The cool ocean breeze gently stirred her gray hair, and she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. Around her, she was surrounded by people who truly valued her, not for her money, but for who she was. Maria was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Clara and Marcelo had promised to visit her over the weekend for a family meal. And this time, Helena knew it would be different. This time it would be sincere. Helena reflected on her journey, from the lonely days in the grand mansion to the moments of revelation and reconciliation. She understood that the greatest wealth she had wasn't material, but the love and authenticity of the connections that now filled her life. The road had been long and full of challenges, but she finally felt that she had found what she was looking for: inner peace. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply the fresh sea air, and a serene smile spread across her lips. The world around her was at peace, and finally, so was she. To watch the next exciting story, click on the video on the screen. See you there.